The history of Yakuza's reception in the West has been rather colorful. From the days where the series was misunderstood as a GTA clone, to the golden age of the 7th console generation, we've seen a myriad of opinions get shared about the franchise, with those expressed by mainstream critics commonly greatly differing from those of longtime fans. You may recall how I went over this subject roughly 3 years ago, but in the time since then, we've seen the release of 5 new Yakuza games, or 6 if you count Dark Ties as its own thing, alongside updated ports of Yakuza 0, Kiwami, and Kiwami 2, all of which led to a vastly different ranking compared to that of the old video. First things first though, here's a quick reminder on the way the list that will follow was even constructed. Point number 1. The basis for the rankings will be the Metacritic scores of the games, or more specifically, the average between every aggregate score for a port by Metacritic's metrics. This means that in the case of Yakuza 6, for example, the final placement will equal the average values between its PlayStation 4, PC, and Xbox One scores. Point number 2. Japanese releases will not be included on this list, due to the aforementioned site not featuring such versions in its grading system. This also means that select ports exclusive to Japan, like the PlayStation 3 versions of Yakuza 1 and 2, will sadly be exempt from the calculations. Lastly, point number 3, the latest RGG release to be included on this list is 2026's Yakuza Kiwami 3, so this should give you all the context necessary regarding the presence or absence of certain Yakuza games should you find this video in a few years. Without further ado, let's look at the updated results. Opening this list with spot number 20, the worst reviewed Yakuza game to date is still Yakuza Dead Souls. This was the first spin-off to release in the West, and one whose zombie setting proved to be a rough sell for audiences at the time. Between this, the niche status of the IP back in the day, and the apparent performance issues that became the subject of memery ever since, Dead Souls has been the quintessential black sheep for Yakuza since its release. Having said that, the reception of the game has vastly improved within the dedicated community, finding its boldness to be a nice way of broadening the series' artistic reach. Despite the technical shortcomings, it makes for a fun experience, so here's hoping it receives some form of re-release down the line. In spot number 19, we have a game whose Yakuza status is consistently debated upon, Fist of the North Star: Lost Paradise. For the uninitiated, this is a collaborative project between Hokuto no Ken and Ryuga Gotoku, developed by RGG Studio for the PlayStation 4. Between the gameplay similarities, callbacks to Yakuza, and casting choices contributing to deliberate correlations between the two IPs, it's likely the most eccentric release the studio has done to date, and one that is frequently overlooked. The game's grindy nature has become the stuff of legends today, without even addressing the platinum journey. But if you're a fan of intense clashes of will and some of the finest classic shonen stories, Lost Paradise may be exactly what you're looking for to shake the cobwebs of modern AAA gaming. So give it a shot if you come across a copy. Number 18, we have the beginning of this decades-old franchise, the original Yakuza for the PlayStation 2. It served as a bold step forward for Sega due to its decision to make a game targeted at an adult demographic, and the blend of compelling crime drama with arcade beat-em-up influences made for a winning formula that birthed a new mainstay for the company. Its reception in the West has not been stellar though, due to the notion that this was a mere GTA clone, a perception that would persist with Western reviewers for quite some time. The particularly vulgar English dub didn't help matters in that regard, but looking at the game now, it's hard not to adore nigh every part of the experience. It both taught the team what to do moving forward and what to avoid in their attempts to evolve, hence why the influence from this game still stands true even in the newest Yakuza games. It's still a fantastic experience, faults and all. In spot number 17, we have the latest and currently most infamous release of the catalog, Yakuza Kiwami 3. Given how Metacritic didn't separate the accompanying Gaiden game as its own entry, discussion on this release's metrics is rather muddied. While K3 itself is riddled with a myriad of controversial choices, including severe content cuts, overt combat simplifications, and polarizing story rewrites, the fandom's reception towards Dark Ties has been mostly positive by comparison, with many praising its grittier tone and more succinct progression compared to Kiwami 3. With this being another in the line of numerous budget releases as of late, the mixed reception from critics was to be expected. But rather than see this as the presumed end of the franchise, many people still look hopefully towards the next RGG release, hoping to see it as a return to form. So here's hoping it makes up for Kiwami 3's missteps in one way or another. Next up, we have two releases with a shared Metacritic average, the first of which is the last PlayStation 2 Yakuza game, Yakuza 2. A direct improvement in almost every regard in terms of gameplay and presentation, it's a game that honestly deserves more praise than it gets, even when compared to the brilliant highs of that particular console generation. I may be biased, both in terms of seeing PlayStation 2 games as the peak of gaming creativity and being a hardcore Yakuza fan, but the seamlessness of this game is such a great sweet spot of arcadey feeling beat-em-ups, freedom to explore with no semblance of bloat, and giving you this comfortable space to return to that's its own thing, even when compared to future Yakuza games or the charming Yakuza 1 itself. As for the entry with which Yakuza 2 shares a placement, here's something I haven't featured in the previous list, despite it having released by the time the video launched. The Kaito Files was the first substantial DLC campaign that we got, and an entry that I commonly praised, but rarely categorized as a standalone experience. However, with the fact I want to speak rather highly of Dark Ties, without the bonds of Kiwami 3, I may want to separate Kaito Files from LJ down the line, and Metacritic seems to support this train of thought. This is a short and beautifully succinct journey where Kaito works through some past regrets and gives us the best love story that RGG wrote. We have revamped versions of Kiryu's Brawler and Beast styles, packaged into the balancing goodness from mainline LJ, and frankly, apart from the initial pricing and lack of post-game activities including New Game Plus, this is one of the best primers that could give you an idea on why people speak so highly of Yakuza, or even Judgment in its own regard. Entry number 14, both one of the most underrated and overrated games of the franchise, Like a Dragon Gaiden, The Man Who Erased His Name. The status of this game largely depends on which fan of the series you ask, but from its inception, this was a strange game to pitch. It technically undoes the finality of Yakuza 6, it's a whole new form of Yakuza budget release, and while its highs are untouchable, there's also ample amounts of additions that dilute the experience for a casual fan, provided you're not acquainted with certain helpful skips and general mechanical exploits that make it more fun. Apart from the infamous statement of, "This is the perfect starting point," I think this is one of the best experiences of the franchise, but not one that will click with everyone for a variety of reasons, so the placement in the lower half of the list does ultimately make sense. Next up, we have the first remake of the franchise, Yakuza Kiwami. Building off the systems that got to shine in Yakuza 0, and either completely copying them or adding some necessary improvements, this is the one remake I can genuinely say stands on equal footing with the game it is adapting, divisive as this statement may be on its own. The fact there is so much moveset reuse and side content recycling is obviously not the best look for a newcomer this early in their playing sequence, but Kiwami also gives a more faithful look into the value that the OG game carried, more than any other remake would do for its associated originators. It also improves on the writing of the first idealistic rival of the series and makes Zero's combat styles infinitely more fun, no matter the player's skill level. So despite its budget and frankly safe nature behind the release, it does exactly what it should, and prevents newcomers from going through a shock of jumping back to a PlayStation 2 game while going through the series. Continuing on with the remake trend, we have Ishin Kiwami, a particularly unique release in RGG's catalog. It is the only case of a remake in Unreal Engine so far, which came with a variety of technical worries over the untranslated original, but it is also the most faithful of all the remakes. Granted, one could even call this more of a remaster than a remake in its execution, but OG Ishin was such a fantastic experience that it didn't really need all that many improvements to make an impact. It features some great accessibility options, beautiful visuals, and despite the combat downgrades and select grind increases, preserves the value of the original. It's unfortunate that the West simply doesn't click with the samurai spin-offs, looking at the minimal discourse surrounding either Kenzan or OG Ishin, but I genuinely love this remake, as shown in my extensive coverage, and if nothing else, it helps prepare any interested fan for a run of the original game, even without a guide, thanks to the faithful nature of Ishin Kiwami's experience. Just barely missing out on the top 10, we have Yakuza 4, the first game to introduce multiple protagonists and an experience that deepens Kamurocho to a greater extent than most RGG games. It became somewhat of an underground choice for a fan to pick due to the degree of memery surrounding its narrative choices. Back when it launched, it was a mind-blowing experience to dig into, and it featured less infamous cuts in its localization compared to the PlayStation 3 iteration of Yakuza 3. So despite its middle-of-the-road position these days, Yakuza 4 is a memorable experience any way you cut it. Also, it introduces one of the biggest fan favorites with Akiyama and wrote compelling arcs for Tanimura and Saejima. So despite some retcons and abandonments down the line, I'd say the game still holds up pretty well today. Opening up the top 10, we have an entry that's been the talk of the town ever since its launch, but perhaps even more so following the announcement of its remake. Yakuza 3 was the first PlayStation 3 game to hit the West. It gave us insight into a properly 3D Kamurocho, deepened Kiryu's character unimaginably with the orphanage sections. You probably already know this as I've repeated it dozens of times over the years. Yes, the Blokuza memes may still follow this entry, no matter how blown out of proportion, and yes, the pacing of the game is genuinely messy at times, but it's arguably one of the biggest standout entries of the original trilogy. It introduced karaoke, revelations, had some phenomenal side modes, gave us one of the best Kyodai archetype characters, and one of the finest antagonists to date. When you observe it in its totality, it's pretty hard to hate a game with so much going for it. Moving on to spot number 9, the culmination of the early to mid era of the Dragon Engine and the golden child of RGG games, this is Lost Judgment. What started off as a relatively niche entry, even among the broader Yakuza community at first, eventually grew into one of the most entertaining playgrounds for both casual and hardcore fans. The combat flows beautifully, the side content is nearing close to Yakuza 5 territory in variety, and the OST is probably one of the best non-rock oriented parts of RGG's catalog. The story may have its issues, but the experience at large is so memorable that you can't help but lament how we never got a proper third entry to conclude Yagami's story. Still, if you had to go out on any note, the combo of LJ and Kaito files is one of the most formidable ones you could wish for, in terms of sheer quality. In spot number 8, we have the modern contender for the most overhated Yakuza game, the extensively wordy Like a Dragon Pirate Yakuza in Hawaii. Being RGG's response to the continuous requests for a new Majima game and serving as a means of helping fans stay in tune with the series before Lad 9 dropped, this spin-off somehow still went down an experimental route. Prominent ship combat, a treasure that could reset the ongoing Yakuza struggle for existence, an experience presented through the lens of a Majima whose desire for letting loose was but an instinct, rather than a deliberate choice as it would otherwise be. While the amount of filler was reaching critical levels, when divorced from that, you have an unapologetically carefree spin-off here, only rivaled by the likes of Dead Souls with its cheekiness. And frankly, I think the series is better off for having committed to the spin-off than if it had always stuck by its standard, narrative, and structural formula. Moving on to number 7, we have the original Judgment. 6 years after RGG's experiment with the Kurohyou series concluded, they decided to give the idea of an entirely self-sufficient spin-off series another go, and the end result was Yagami's journey to undo his life's greatest mistake. I think the series deserves all the credit it gets, being one of, if not the best, story that RGG has written to date, and the first Dragon Engine game where the true potential of this engine's combat finally started showing itself. Our classic stomping grounds got a new identity to them thanks to Judgment's friend system, new investigation elements, drone races, and more. And while it may not have been the commercial success that was anticipated, it spawned a following retaining the spirit of the tightly knit Yakuza community from the days before Yakuza 0. The game is still a pleasure to revisit, despite the myriad of tailing missions halting one's progress every now and then. Number 6, we have what was for a while the single most ambitious RGG release, Yakuza 5. The amount of substance here is genuinely remarkable, not just in terms of the sheer number of activities you can do, but also their uniqueness, with anything from highway races, to hunting in the woods, to a variety of idle activities, and a genuinely fun twist on the classic baseball minigame. Putting aside the messy plot and some combat downgrades compared to Yakuza 4, the number of times this entry hits its intended peaks is nothing to scoff at, and is arguably one of the most important entries that would teach the team how to hone their craft and deliver some of their finest experiences in the years after 5's debut. In spot number 5, we have the first truly 8th gen RGG release, Yakuza 6. This was the first entry to ditch PlayStation 3 support in the series. It was the first Dragon Engine game, and attempted to conclude the Kiryu saga with one tightly woven experience. While it's easy to look back on this game and call it relatively bare bones, this was also the game with the largest amount of unique assets, with little reliance on past engines and franchise experiments. The Dragon Engine style is an evident clean slate, its variety of heat actions are largely brand new, all sub-stories are fully voiced, with the introduction of the X to progress in-engine cinematics, and exploration is more seamless than ever, with no loading screens to separate you and the interior of your average shop of interest. While the common sentiment is how its ending has been disrespected by literally everything that followed, I would argue that the choices of this game are the main reason why Kiryu finally snapped out of a cycle that the writers continuously put him through up until that point. However, that's a story for another time. Back to the point, if only this game got a PlayStation 5 port so that it ran at 60 frames per second on consoles, would genuinely be golden. Speaking of, here we have the remake of the golden Dragon's debut. Yakuza Kiwami 2 was the second budget release by the team in the sense we now identify them as. It took the assets of Yakuza 6 and added vastly more to them, making this entry a more standard Yakuza experience in the grand scheme of things. It was also the go-to option for Yakuza modding for a while, being the latest Dragon Engine beat-em-up to hit the PC for a good number of years. Now, while I personally rank this entry at the bottom of the series for a variety of reasons, critics genuinely adored this entry upon release, and last year's free PlayStation 5 patch, finally adding 60 frames per second performance to consoles, was a welcome addition as well. So despite its many shortcomings compared to the rest of the franchise, this is still a competent action game that gives you insight into the bizarre world of RGG. Oh yeah, and it also introduced the now expanded fanbase to Kaoru Sayama, which is very much appreciated. Opening the top 3 portion, we have the game with the biggest turnaround of the Yakuza community's public opinion, Yakuza 7. You may not believe this if you got into the series after the fact, but this entry and its direction were detested in the West at one point, and truth be told, the fact that it would eventually become widely adored despite that was a miracle. The game itself is fantastic. Hell, it made me enjoy JRPGs in general after failing to get into them for a number of years, but the fear surrounding Yakuza's change in direction was still understandable. The games have such a unique identity to them that changing any element within them could be cause for concern. But RGG committed to their goal, which allowed the series to expand into a broader community without losing its core drawing points. It may not have won everyone over, but it's an honest effort where you can admit its qualities no matter your personal views on the genre it belongs to. And Ichiban, being who he is, played a massive role in that regard. So here's hoping we see more of him soon enough in a non-pre-order setting. Entry number 2 on this list is one of the biggest surprises that I had when recalculating the scores for the script, because the go-to favorite Yakuza game in terms of popularity has somehow been dethroned. The reasons for Yakuza 0's descent from the number 1 spot can be attributed to 2 things, one of which is a record launch of a certain game following the post-Yakuza 0 and 7 popularity boom, and the second is the release of a rather infamous version of the beloved prequel, called Zero Director's Cut. We won't go over the delisting shenanigans and narrative retcons here yet again, but the fact that Zero is still one of the top 2 in this illustrious franchise only further solidifies the quality of the core package. One of the most unique settings for the series, the biggest number of individual styles in a campaign's critical path, a story that still reels people in a decade after its omnipresence in online discussions, this is arguably still the most complete package of the franchise. And if you somehow found your way to this video without having played a single one of these entries, you owe it to yourself to, at the very least, try Yakuza 0 and see what the praise is all about. If any of these entries stands the chance of turning you into a fan, then it's most likely this one. Okay, so we got through all the usual suspects, but what about the number 1 spot? In a surprising turn of events, the best reviewed Yakuza game as of the time of this recording is Like a Dragon: Infinite Wealth. While this could have been inferred thanks to the incredible launch sales and exceptional timing of the release in general, I honestly forgot how positive everyone was over Infinite when it finally released. Part of my surprise is due to the community's change in opinions in the months that would follow, with more and more criticism being directed at the game, either for genuinely valid reasons, like the pacing and characterization issues, or for just disliking the direction of subsequent games, thus seeing this entry or Gaiden as the beginning of the end. Personally, I find this game to actually be underrated in many ways. It exceeds Yakuza 5's amount of fun content, the blend of turn-based and semi-beat-em-up embellishments makes this a contender for one of the best JRPG combat systems ever, in my humble opinion, and despite some objective shortcomings, the campaign still expands the horizons of what Yakuza storytelling can be, showing us new signs of characters we thought we fully knew up to now. Assuming this truly ends up as the final Kiryu game, and that Ichi is at last at the helm of Like a Dragon 9, I think the sentiment surrounding Infinite will once again even out to being mostly positive. So I just hope that the ominous aura of Kiwami 3 doesn't collapse this bridge, of sorts, between classic and modern Yakuza. Well, here we are with the updated rankings. Again, while my personal preference list would look vastly different from any of this, it's nice to see an alternate take on the franchise's strongest and weakest offerings. Brief side note at the end, but you'll notice how select entries here didn't have review scores listed for all of the systems where they actually dropped, and this is due to Metacritic not having received enough reviews for certain systems to create an aggregate. Hell, some of them didn't even have a single review for a particular system. This type of stuff becomes most apparent with the latest Yakuza games that also released on PlayStation 4, as very few people seem to have paid attention to those versions, hence why RGG's decision to go full next-gen with Stranger Than Heaven was definitely a good call. That aside, revisiting an older video of mine was honestly fun, so if you have any other updates that you would like to see, or maybe see a video focused on what Japanese reviewers consider the best Yakuza games, feel free to suggest it in the comments. Also, let me know how you would rank all of these games by whatever metric best fits your interests. Thank you everyone for watching, and I hope that this video was a fun one. So, until next time, take care of yourselves and have a great day. Cheers!